Hi, I'm Ben and welcome to Field Foley episode 16. Joining us today is Jason Smith, the mastermind behind the retro shooter CULTIC. His passion for game development ignited in his early teens and persisted, leading to him working on games even while pursuing studies in graphic design and working in full-time jobs. As of March 2021, Jason embarked on a thrilling journey, signing with 3D Realms to work full-time on his labor of love, CULTIC. So hello, Jason, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, well, you're absolutely welcome. It's always nice to catch up with you. You know, the once every 2 years that we get to do it in person.
Oh yeah, that's right. And people are probably wondering why you are here today because I mean the podcast is called Field Foley and you're a solo game developer. But we met at Realms Deep this year, actually 2023, and we talked about your game, especially because I really like your game, CULTIC. And
we met in a field, which is where it comes from.
Yeah, we met in a field, naked. No, but I mean, we talked
That's
about...
how you get the Foley.
Yeah, that's how you get the Foley, yeah. No, we talked especially about gun Foley because I overheard you talk about your gun Foley, that you really didn't like how guns sound in other games, that you as a person that is acquainted with guns, you hear those sounds and you're like, okay, this gun sounds like it's broken. I wouldn't like pull the trigger on this one. I would like, I think this would explode in my face, right? That's how you started.
Yeah, I did talk about. I guess I don't really want to like name names, but it's always fun when especially games have like extremely excessive amounts of gun rattle. Mm-hmm. Like when like ADSing. Or aiming down the sights just makes it sounds like you're like rattling a bucket of bolts around, and it's like, oh my god, like the firing pin on this is going to go straight into my eye, like as soon as this thing comes down.
Yeah, and so that means like you wanted to do something different with CULTIC and decided to record them yourselves. Do you have like any prior experience in Foley recording, especially, or in gun recording, or was this just something like, okay, I need sounds that like sound really realistic and better than I'm used to, and so I have to do it myself?
So I did. I recorded a lot of the handling Foley myself. The gunshots and stuff are mostly mixed with existing audio sources because unfortunately, I don't really have the equipment to record gunshots or the recording space to do it. And you're not supposed to fire guns inside your house. It turns out. But I did lock myself in a closet surrounded by clothing on all sides, which makes a half decent acoustic dampener so that I could record stuff. And yeah, just like a lot of the guns I was using in the game I own, like the Mare's Leg lever action and the C96 and a double barrel break action shotgun, like I own most of those. And so it was like, well, if I want these like hyper specific sounds, like a good example would be with the shotgun, if you only fire one shell and then reload, it plays a special reload animation where your guy breaks the shotgun open and then like catches one of the shells as it ejects and pushes it back in. And it's like it's hard to find like super specific audio for that. And so I was like, well, hell, I'll just record it then. That's not a big deal. So yeah, a lot of that's just like recorded in my closet. And then some it's a mixture of the two. Some stuff is from like I've got these libraries of just like hours of raw gun Foley that people have recorded, and so you kind of like fill in the blanks there. Like when I did all the C96 sounds, I guess actually it was before I owned one, and so a lot of those were made using pre-recorded Foley that I mixed together. But once I was able to have a bit bigger of a budget and start acquiring the guns I needed to record sounds from. Which is always nice when you can be a hobbyist gun collector, but you can justify it all as expenses. You write it off on your taxes.
Yeah, it's a business expense. That's interesting. I totally get that as like a Foley person myself. Like the bunch of weird stuff I bought that is all business expenses. Right now I have like a ventilator next to me, like the ceiling fan, like a big one, an old one that I bought just because I needed specific like sounds of the fan spinning up, slowing down, and I will probably do some custom electronics to make the speeding up and slowing down a bit more intricate. And I mean, it's all business expense. At the end of the day, it's all just garbage probably, but it's like, okay, everything that makes sounds is good. So I especially got one like from eBay very rattly and that's very old because I don't need a hyper cool, very silent fan. I need the grimy fan noises.
Yeah, it's always fun how specific those things wind up needing to be. I remember reading, I think it was a Game Informer article a really long time ago, back when there was like a hybrid RTS FPS Command and Conquer game being made. I think it was just called Tiberium, maybe, which was like a follow-up to Tiberian Sun. I could be completely wrong on this. This is very old memory. But anyway,
but I know the game you're talking of, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the people working on it did an interview, and they were talking about how like they're talking about the audio design and how he was like eating breakfast with his family, and his like toddler son was like dragging his like a plastic fork across a plastic plate, and it kind of just made like this little like whoop sound, and he was like, that would be an awesome sound for like sci-fi bullets whizzing by the player. And so he's like, so I just grabbed my son's like his son's plate and fork and washed it, and then like took it with him to work. It was just but it's like cool stuff like that. That's like, oh yeah. So that's why I have to write off 200 pounds of celery that I buy, because I'm just making like bone crunching noises for the entire year.
Yeah, the classic celery noises. Yeah. It's also like you develop an ear for like, whenever you hear something interesting, you're always like, okay, well, what was that right now next to me? Like maybe someone on the plane or maybe someone on the train station eats something or has like a box that makes a specific sound, and it's always like, oh fuck, I wish I had that exact box because that opening sound is so juicy.
Yeah,
it's a curse, and it's also kind of fun, but still, I mean.
Well, the other curse about, I guess not so much like being a Foley artist, but as much as like an audio designer, is when you start to become like super familiar with certain sound libraries. There is a, I don't know the name of the library, but there's a particular sound library that's used heavily in 7 Days to Die, which is something my wife and I play a lot together. Yeah, and that it's like, and then we were watching a show, I think it was The Watcher on Netflix, maybe, and they use the exact same sound library in almost everything. And so it's like when like when the character in the show went to like open their mailbox, it's like the sound of opening a mailbox in 7 Days to Die. And I'm just like, I know that sound. And then down to like when, like when the lead actress like opens a drawer in her kitchen and shuffles for something, it's like the sound of when you like search a pile of papers on the ground in 7 Days to Die. And then like the sound of lighting a pipe bomb in 7 Days to Die is like a super commonly used sound for like lighting a fuse on like Dynamite or something in TV shows. And so we just like, you catch that stuff all the time, and you're like, ah. And it's weird because it almost makes like the production value of the thing you're watching feel cheap, because it's like, wait, like if I could get that sound effect, like it's like when you hear music that's written using a sample library that you also own, it's just like, oh man, if I could have written this, then is it really Hollywood quality?
Yeah, I'm guessing like this is, I mean, the Wilhelm scream is the one that like almost everyone knows. Everyone knows that kind of scream, but you have a lot of other ones that quickly start to like, people that start to notice like this sounds the same, or even people that don't really like care about sound. They are on a subconscious level like accustomed to those sounds, and then they react kind of the same. Like they say like, oh, this show, I don't know, the sound wasn't that great, or it didn't feel that great, or something like that. Because if you have, especially if you have those disconnects, if you have a sound that's not quite fitting, for example, if you have like I don't know, let's say a fridge door opens and it's way too heavy, the sound, or it's way too light, that's something on a subconscious level you always notice, and it always brings you out of the immersion. It always feels a bit cheap and like a parlor trick then, right?
Oh, yeah. One of my favorite examples of this is and I had to point this out when I made my wife watch Walking Dead with me. Is there's a and I won't spoil it, even though this this episode aired like 12 years ago. But there is an episode where Rick, the lead character of the show, has to basically put down one of his friends and team members because they're bitten and they don't want to turn. And it's like the super dramatic like season finale, because it's a character that's been on the show for a long time. But of course, like Rick's iconic weapon is a revolver, and so of course it's and so it's like this really like intense scene. He's got like the revolver pointed at the head of the person, and the camera kind of like pans away and looks away, and then like the season ends on a cut to black where you hear him fire his gun, but the sound effect they used is like It's a sound of a gun firing and then a casing hitting the floor.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, and of course, revolvers don't eject casings, and so it's just kind of one of those things that like you're like, wait a second, like I'm pretty sure I've heard this sound effect in Family Guy before.
Yeah, I knew exactly what you were talking about because even though I'm not a gun nut, sometimes these things are like very, very weird. I mean, it's the same like with all those movies where you hear a shotgun fire 3 times before they reload, and you're like, I'm pretty sure there was a double barrel with like just 2 shells in them. I'm not a gun person, but that doesn't fit. And yeah, those little things. And yeah, as I said, even if you not notice it like consciously, if a lot of those errors add up, then you feel like it's all smoke and mirrors. I mean, it is all smoke and mirrors, but it's the suspension of disbelief that really gets hurt in the process. And yeah, sound is a big factor of that. Yeah.
My wife and I we're rewatching an old forensics kind of like it's called Forensics Files, but it's like an old crime documentary show, and it's from like I want to say the late '80s and early '90s, and so of course with it being a crime dramatization show, they recreate a lot of scenes, and of course there's a lot of like gun homicide in there, so. Every single time they fire a gun in one of these dramatizations, it's like that classic stock Magnum Deagle sound, like the one, that's like the Counter-Strike Desert Eagle sound. That's in like every single like anytime anybody's ever firing a gun. But it's like what kills me is they use it when it's like her husband shot her with a .22 caliber pistol, and then it plays this gigantic like Magnum sound, and it's like. I mean, like a .22 is like a step above a BB gun in terms of noise. Like it's certainly not quiet, but it's not this like giant thundering sound. Yeah. It's just that stuff's always kind of funny too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'm guessing you as a gun person like noticed this in all the media and all the video games. And how do you like for your own game? How did you like approach it? Do you go with like the realism and the sound first and then the gameplay? I mean, I'm guessing for bullet amounts in the magazine, that's probably not true, right? Because you need to balance like the weapons. But I mean, with reload timings, for example, animations and the sounds, is it like something that is high on your priority list and you try to make it as authentic as possible?
So there's kind of like a general rule I try to follow of not sacrificing player experience for authenticity. Like I really want to respect the source material in that sense, especially for like for people who are like gun nuts, so to speak, or people who are just enthusiastic about it, or even whether that's like maybe that's just fully design instead of it being gun specifically. But so you want to be faithful to that part of it. Like you don't want to use what's blatantly like like a shotgun for what's supposed to be a smaller caliber pistol. But at the same time, you also don't want to also just use like a raw recording of a shotgun firing for your sound, because that's basically just like it's just a pop and that's it. And it may be more authentic, but it's not very interesting to listen to. And so it's probably like a balance of the two. Like you want it to be like respectful of the weapon that you're firing and the experience you would have with that. But you don't want it to be so authentic that it sacrifices player experience. And so it's kind of like trying to meet in the middle there, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, what I really appreciate is what we already talked about, like it's not rattling around when you just switch weapons or when you run around with a gun. It's not like rattling, like you said, like balls in a bucket, which is sometimes in games where it's like, why would it do that sound? I mean, it feels like it would just explode in your face. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and like a little bit of rattle is fine. Like especially things that are going to have like attachments on them or carry handles. Like there's going to be a little bit of movement with the internal parts of the gun, or maybe just a little bit of rattle of like the magazine and the magazine well. But it's certainly not. Especially like especially like in shows where like anytime somebody like raises up a gun, it plays like a shotgun pumping sound. And it's just like, well, I mean, that's not exactly how that works, but it's close enough.
Yeah, I mean, I like to use that in weird ways. For example, I used like a shotgun reload sound for somebody like just drawing up. It was a cartoon scene I did sound for, and he draw up this really big hammer, and it was like a Like it's just a reload sound before he hits the guy. And for this creative users, I think the shotgun sound is always always the one to go. But yeah, I think what probably is interesting is though to design some kind of sound when you're switching weapons, so the player knows what weapons he's on, right? Like right from a sounds perspective, you already know, like you have a little like equip sound or whatever you want to call it, right?
Right. Like in CULTIC specifically, I actually don't really use equip sounds at all.
All right, that's right. Yeah.
So about the most you get in terms of like weapon handling audio is like aiming down the scope on the FG42 has a little bit of scope rattle. That is honestly probably violating my own views on weapon rattling because it's pretty rattly. But I didn't want it to be like, completely silent either. But yeah, I didn't wind up going with equip sounds for most of the weapons, just kind of like for that same reason that, I don't know, like if you're raising up this weapon, it really wouldn't make all that much sound. And to me, I kind of felt like it would get annoying maybe hearing that over and over again. But that's probably gonna change person to person on how they prefer that. Maybe some people like really like the experience of having that cacophony of like rattles and clicks when you pull a weapon up onto screen. And I guess part of that's also like the the style of animation too of how you get it out. Because if you're like a more over the top action game and getting out, when you equip a pistol, your guy like pulls it out and spins it on his finger and then like slaps it down into his palm. Like that would be something that you would really want to have some good audio on. So I guess it probably just depends on the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense probably, yeah. And I mean, speaking of sounds you recorded yourself, like what of the sounds would you like to record yourself and can't? I mean, we spoke already about the gunshots, but I'm thinking about you're doing all the sound yourself. So for everything else, like for doors, for footsteps, for whatever else you have in there, is this something where you try to go to a library first because it's the quickest way and you're like a one-man developer studio? Or is there like specific things where you're like, okay, I need something specific and I'm gonna like go out and try to record it myself?
So far I haven't really encountered any sounds that were, aside from Weapon Foley, nothing that was like so specific that I couldn't just find it in a library. And for the most part, yeah, being a solo developer really means having to pick your battles and like what you want to spend time and energy on. And as much as it would be cool to do, going out and recording the perfect door opening sound effect isn't something that I'm gonna have time to do every time I need a new sound. And so yeah, most of that stuff I used to just use I used to use Freesound a whole lot, which is just mostly people recording their own raw Foley for folks that aren't familiar with it. And a lot of that stuff is just like free Creative Commons attribution. And so it's nice to use that as a starting point, and then you can kind of mix that together with commercial sounds that you might have, and then beef the audio up, and then in my case, crunch it back down again for the final product. But I recently switched to using Soundly, which I was originally really skeptical of, because it's like a subscription based audio service.
Yeah.
But it wound like the libraries it has are like pretty impressive. And so that's just like, it's like an application on your computer that you just pop open and you just like type in what you need, and then whatever sound, and then you look at the sounds, and I've pretty much always been able to find something that's almost perfect for what I need. And then you can just open it in Audacity directly from there. And so that has sped up audio design by a ton, because I'm not for stuff that's a little more niche, or like you would really need to have like an actual recording space and decent equipment to record it. Like things like explosions and destruction and rubble and stuff like that. That's a little harder to just go out in your backyard and produce. It's really nice to have like a pretty comprehensive library just like at your fingertips for that.
Yeah, exactly the same for me. I mean, recording explosions, for example, is some of the most involved things you can do. Also, like fire, everything that's like more than a little bonfire is something that requires planning, professionals, and yeah. Also, you need a good space and great microphones to get just the thing you want to. So, yeah, I'm relying on libraries as well for that stuff. But yeah, Soundly, I've heard of it, but I've never used it. But I think I'm gonna look into it, because it's probably also interesting for some stuff if you like in a pinch and need something very specific. So far, I usually try to do it myself or what I also do is I use library sounds, but I also try to mix in my own sounds with them, so it's not always the same stock sound. It's like, especially for fire, for explosions, I have those libraries, and I don't want to buy like hundreds of libraries of those sounds, so I use those, and then I do something else and mix that in and try to design something else out of it that fits the current scenario.
I do a lot of that with my weapon audio, because there's like, I've got like a handful of gunshot sounds that work really well as like a bass. Like they have just the right amount of pop. They aren't peaking out the audio. They've got just the right amount of like they're like, just crispy enough, just punchy enough, but they don't have much for like, they don't really have any kind of tail on them, and there's not really much for like the weapon dynamics. And so using that as like a base, and then you you go and get the report or the like the trail off from a different sound that better matches the caliber or style of weapon, and then maybe you go and like grab a dry fire sound from, like, if you're making, like, if it's a handgun, maybe go get like the dry fire off of like a 1911, just so you have like a tiny bit of that mechanical metal sound as the shot happens. And then like when I was building the sound effect for the semi-automatic shotgun in Interlude, or most people recognize it as a Browning Auto 5, but it's technically a Model 11 because that's what I own and used. But the two are like virtually identical. But a big part of that gun is that it has this super heavy bolt on it that makes like a pretty distinctive sound when it slams forward after it chambers the next round. And so, like, I didn't record the shotgun firing myself, but I did record like the sound of the bolt going back and then slamming back forward, so that you have a nice like a nice metallic addition on top of that firing sound that makes it a lot more unique than just like a pop,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, those kinds of clunks and like clicks and metallic, I don't know how to call them, impacts, whatever you want to call them. There are so many different variants, but still, this is something, for example, that I find really hard to search in a library for, because when I'm searching for example, a reload sound or like a big switch, I have a big switch in a game and I want that sound for. If I'm looking for switches, I can listen to, I don't know, 10 hours of switches maybe. And there are so many different things with different components in them, with different like harshness and heaviness, and you can feel like the material. So but that's why I feel that I really need to record a lot of them myself, because it's quicker and it's also a more direct way of getting exactly what I want. And especially like performing something is something that you always want or need to do if you have a specific animation, or if you have something. And the second thing that really irks me is when I find the perfect library sound and then I have one sound and I'm like, but I don't want to repeat this one sound in this game where you can push switches for hundreds of times, so you need like variations. So then either you use that sound, try to cut it up and mix something else in it, or you like just design your own and make variants out of that. That's like, I think recording your own sound is always preferable if you can.
Yeah, that's probably the one, like, I guess that's probably the thing that separates me from, as an audio designer, from people who are, I would say, Foley enthusiasts, is my my willingness to pour money into audio design, because that's one thing I don't have equipment for. And I mean, I have like a Zoom field recorder that I used for like all the closet stuff, but it would be awesome to have equipment that can record in like at higher frequencies, so you can slow stuff down without losing so much quality. But I mean, like, man, that's just a whole other realm of equipment that I haven't invested in, and I'm not sure if I'll ever have the time to really put into it.
Yeah, I'm happy to come over and record all your guns with all my equipment. I just bring my whole bag of microphones and the recorder.
Yeah, we just have to go find somewhere to shoot them. But luckily, I have that covered.
Yeah,
that's the nice thing about living in the middle of nowhere, is it's not too hard to find somewhere to go shoot.
That is always something that's, I mean, you probably guess it, but it's always something that's very weird for me as a European. It's just like, okay, you can just not only own guns, but you can go out in the middle of nowhere and shoot some guns, because like it's a free country.
Yeah, I mean, you want to do it on the biggest thing about that is like understanding the range that you're at, especially when, like, you're firing you could be firing bullets that have a multiple mile travel distance that they are still lethal over. And so we, if we go out and shoot, we've got a couple of basically like some farmland where we've got like big dirt berms set up, so you can basically fire downhill into the dirt. And even if you were to egregiously miss, there's no roads or other property for several miles. So it's kind of nice to have that freedom. And otherwise, I guess you would go to a range, but I don't know how difficult it would be to set up recording in an environment like that has no audio dampening and is basically just like made of concrete. There'd be a lot of reverb to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not preferable.
It would be something I would love to like be a part of someday that I don't have to buy all the equipment for. It would be like a professional recording shoot for like either guns or explosions, like just something that deals with like, some of those sounds that are extremely hard to capture due to like just the volume and the risk and everything. That would be a cool process to be a part of sometime.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I've never fired a gun in my life, so I have no idea. So I would need at least a professional for gun safety and for all the, as you just said, like knowing what range they are, how to handle them, and what to do. But I mean, the same thing would go for me for like explosions, gunfires, and the third thing that I'd really like to do at some point is either like jets or planes, which I hopefully I have something lined up. Hopefully it works out, but maybe even have like a recorder on a small plane, and maybe race cars or something like that. That's also interesting. I've seen like the behind the scenes of the Gran Turismo stuff and all those like games that are really specific where they mic up like a whole car with like 20 microphones in all the different places, and then they have all this massive amount of material, and then the audio integration stage is amazing because it's all like physics based. So when the physics change, the sound changes appropriately, and all that stuff is like really interesting to me on a technical level, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a really cool setup to be a part of. I also wonder, like, I don't think I would want to do this because I think it would be incredibly tedious. But the setup for doing like recordings for like virtual instruments, I think it'd be really cool too. Just like to look at that process, where it's like, all right, we like here's a cello, and we need you to play every single note a cello can play, and in these like 16 different styles.
Yeah, and intensities.
Yeah, because it's like the library I use for virtual composition. I mean, it's like if you pull up any given instrument, you've got, like at least like 10 different styles, and then depending on the way you set the note velocity, it's going to change the attack on the note as well, and it's crazy. Like that just seems like a ridiculous amount of work.
Yeah, that is definitely something that's interesting to me, and I'm looking forward to getting hopefully a guest on the show that did something like that. It's also on my list of things to have. And speaking about that, I mean, you're also doing everything, right? You're doing the programming, you're doing the art, you're doing the sound and the music for your game, right?
Right.
And I heard you mentioned the term selective bit crushing. So can you maybe tell us a bit more about your approach to that?
Yeah, so the audio design is kind of targeting that, like that build engine era audio where you kind of got a lot of bit crushing going on just in order to fit all of the sound, I assume A, onto whatever disk it came on, but also B, into the limited amount of RAM the system had available. So those file sizes had to be small. And of course at the time it was a system limitation, but for anybody who was playing those games, like that audio, like that style just kind of becomes like it's just you associate it with playing that kind of game. Almost like I think like the best example I have of it is in Duke Nukem 3D when you go underwater, like the underwater loop that plays is extremely bit crushed. But it's just like it's just like an aesthetic at that point, And so it's like I want to capture that aesthetic, but without the loss of fidelity that comes with it. Because of course, when you're bit crushing to that level, something like a soft wind loop, like just like an eerie wind loop for ambience, would get completely destroyed by bit crushing to the point where it would just be terrible to listen to. And there's some build engine games where that's very apparent. Like it's like this was maybe supposed to be a nice soft whistling, but it's turned into like this horrible sound. And so And so I kind of did a bit of like selective bit crushing in CULTIC, where I'm not just taking a sound and slapping a bit crush on a filter on top of it and calling it a day, but I am making sure that I save parts of that sound that are important, and just introducing the bit crushing to the point where you kind of get that gritty graininess to the sound, but without losing like the dynamics and kind of like the texture and flavor of the sound. So a good example would be like the C96 firing sound effect. There's a lot of metal in that sound, a lot of like hearing like the C96's hammer slapping down and getting pushed back, and you hear a lot of that in the audio. But if you just bit crush the entire clip, you lose all of it.
Yeah.
And it just kind of turns into like a little like crunchy belch on top of what is otherwise like a pretty clear gunshot. And so in that case, a lot of times that came down to rendering the sound out twice, where you render out the first time as the bit crushing. So that is like just a pretty thick bit crush applied to the whole thing. And then you render it out a second time completely clean. And then you basically are just EQing the two against each other. So like if I'm really wanting to keep the high end metal part of this sound, and that's what gets lost in the bit crushed version, then in the bit crushed version, you kind of drop the high end of the EQ down. So you're kind of like getting rid of that part of the audio waveform. Yeah. And then in the clean version, you're doing the inverse. Like for the deep gunshot part of it, you want the crusty version. And so you kind of lower the EQ for those ranges on the clean sound, and so that's generally how all of those sounds were produced. And in some cases, it was more of just lowering the amount of bit crushing that was happening, and that's probably most prevalent on like ambient loops, like interior, because like those like interior drones and like interior room samples, I'm a really big fan of using, but bit crushing destroys them completely to the point where they're just not usable anymore. And so stuff like that, I would basically leave the sample completely intact, but then bit crush like a just like a more generic like tone, and then use kind of like the texture from that and overlay it onto the otherwise pretty clean room tone, almost like when you do a virtual composition and it's like mostly clean because it's virtual. So then you layer some hall noise on top of it. So it sounds more like a live recording. So it's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like that. And then the music does something similar, where the music is a combination of a highly bit crushed custom sound font that I made that uses like really short, crunchy instrument samples, kind of like you would hear on like maybe like an N64, and then also combines it with full quality orchestral samples. So you kind of get the flavor of that kind of retro sound with the shorter instrument samples and the more I guess like synthesized sound on it, but then you also aren't just crushing the entire track where it hurts to listen to, and the crispiness of your strings is completely gone, and the depth of the bass is completely gone because you've crushed it out. And so you get to keep the nice texture on your music, but you still get to inject a bit of that retro crunchy aesthetic on top of it.
Yeah, so it's like a hi-fi, lo-fi thing, and I really noticed it in the music pretty early on. It was like, oh, this instrument sounds like really full, and then you have like those crunchy bits on top, and it fits all together. And it made me wonder, like in the beginning, I thought you had at least someone for like the music or for the sound or something. So what's really interesting to me is like, how did you also get into like the whole sound design sphere and like knowing about all those techniques about is it a lot of trial and error, or do you have some kind of education in sound?
It's pretty much all just trial and error out of necessity. I've been doing game development since I was pretty young, maybe like 12 or so. Granted, I wasn't really making anything good back then, but it was still game dev. So needing sound effects for my game kind of led me to all of the free sound effect websites and the crusty corners of the internet, and then eventually, learning how to kind of like mix my own stuff, and then which I think started off as just like pulling sounds into Windows Sound Recorder, and the only options you really had there was to like increase the volume by 25% or decrease the speed by 100%. And so it was like so it was like I could take a gunshot and make it sound like a huge blown out explosion. And then eventually getting into Audacity and more, more advanced editing techniques. And then I started getting into like MIDI writing because I really wanted to be able to make my own music. But of course, I don't know anything about music, and I still don't. Still can't read sheet music. And and then so just over time, you just kind of learn what works and learn what doesn't work. And then when I was out of like kind of when I got like my first job as an adult, I spent a decent chunk of change on finally getting some like professional orchestral samples, and so I could actually start messing with those instead of using only synthesizers, which is pretty limiting if you're wanting to do more like epic orchestral stuff. And so yeah, it's just been a really long learning experience. But it's basically all just like you said, trial and error, and just like I just write stuff that I think sounds good to me. And luckily that tends to work out pretty well, but I don't really know anything about music theory, and I could read bass clef decently when I was a percussionist in high school, but I certainly can't anymore. So it's I'm definitely not a musician, and definitely wouldn't be very useful in a chamber. But when it comes to sitting at my computer, I'm just dangerous enough to make it work.
Yeah, so I just have to say it works out great because I really like the sound of the music, and I didn't expect it to be all by yourself. So yeah, great job on that.
Well, thank you.
And yeah, but speaking about that, is it something you want to do like your whole life, doing like projects on your own? Is it something that you really like to hold the projects close to your chest and do the stuff you want to do and not deal with like splitting up tasks and communicating like issues and something like that? Or is it for the future maybe something interesting for you to be part of a bigger dev team?
I don't think I'll probably ever want to work as part of a team, just because like part of the whole reason that I do everything myself is because I'm so controlling when it comes to just like I usually have like a very specific vision for how I want something to look and feel and sound, and I don't know how to articulate that half the time. Like I couldn't put it on paper and have somebody else do it. Like I could never have put CULTIC on paper and given it to someone and they would have made it the way that it is, because I don't know how to articulate all that stuff. And B would just be like I don't want to have to compromise on any of that. And I feel like as part of a team, you don't always get to explore all of your ideas just because maybe you don't have time, or maybe that's not, I'm the programmer, so I don't get to artistically express myself in terms of the sound or music, because they've got somebody for that. So my ideas wouldn't be listened to, and that's just part of what makes game dev so fun, is just like the learning and the experimenting and the exploration and putting a new idea on paper and seeing it come to life. And I feel like you don't get that like pure creative expression if you're not in charge of the project. But I also don't want to be in charge of other people either, because I don't want to make some poor guy redo a sound for the 20th time because it's not quite crusty enough, or it's not quite right, or not quite how I imagined it. And I just I'm not the managerial type, so that doesn't really sound like a good time to me either. So my goal is that I would I've wanted to be a game dev since I was since pretty much as far back as I can remember. It's always been something that's really interested me, and so I'm really hoping that I can continue to do solo development in a way that sustains me, because I think going back to like a regular 8 to 5 job would like actually kill me right now. Like being able to work on my own projects at my own pace and stuff has been extremely liberating, and is about as close to a dream come true as you can get in terms of like getting to do your dream job. And so the idea of that not working out is something I try not to think about. We're just going to hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm rooting for you, and it's really cool to hear that you're like really know that that's what you want to do and how you want to do it. So I hope financially it works out in the long term. That would be the only concern I have. Like for myself, if I would be responsible for all the projects myself, it would be okay. But I'm also responsible for them. So if anything goes wrong, it's like it's from downhill from there. Yep. But I can really respect the whole like I have this vision and I want to make it like just the way I want to make it, and I don't want to order people around and articulate stuff. Sometimes it's also like, sometimes you can't really articulate, you just do, and then you see what comes out of it and see, oh, that's what I wanted to do, right?
Yeah, and it's just it's one of those things that, like, when I start working on a game, I don't or not even just a game, but it could be a song or a sound effect or whatever. I don't always know if the idea I have is even good.
Yeah.
And part of that is just like, and this happens so often with music, especially, is like part of that process is just like sitting down and putting everything on paper, and sometimes it sucks. Like there's this a decent folder of like cultic B-sides of tracks that never got finished because like it was a bad idea. Like it just didn't sound as good as I thought. But part of what makes that so rewarding is getting to learn that, getting to sit down and try that thing and learn that it doesn't work, but learn why it doesn't work. Like, well, like this idea I had, the song doesn't sound good because it was way too repetitive. Like I didn't have a fleshed out enough melody for it. So it just turned out really repetitive. Or, even it could even be something like the ability system in Cultic that got scrapped because it just like it worked fine. Like the code is there, the feature works, but it just didn't fit the game. Like it was a bad fit for the game. But like I would never have been satisfied coming up with the idea and then having somebody say that wouldn't work. Like, well, I want to try it though. Like I want to see what it feels like. And not being able to do that would suck because it's not about. And that sounds like kind of conceited or selfish when I say it out loud, but it's not like I'm sure I'm right, but like if I'm wrong, I want to know why. Like I want to know why this wouldn't work, and I need to have that hands-on experience myself. So that's a really important part of the learning process for me is kind of understanding why things work, and more importantly, like why they don't work.
Yeah, I mean that's a real like the science approach to it, right? You test it, and I'm saying normally you never can say before you test an idea if it works or not, because sometimes the weirdest stuff has worked where people have said like, oh, this will never work out. And someone managed to do it in like matching some strange genres together or making some strange styles and musical styles. And it's like, you always have to test your ideas. So I'm with you on that. I have my fair share of things that I did. I think I built, what did I call it? Alien flesh bagpipe instrument. I think like that. So I needed something, or I wanted something specific for creature sound I was doing. And it was a lot of work and it didn't work out. It sounded really horrible. Like not in a good way horrible. I wanted it to sound horrible, monstrous, but it was just not interesting. But yeah, as you said, I learned a lot why it didn't work and what kind of things I needed to do different. And it's like every time something fails, I know I'm on the right path because I learned something new. And you just have to be persistent and try out new stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, then for your game, if you put it out there, is it something do you have like playtesters, like friends that test it and give you feedback? Or overall, like is the player feedback something that's important to you to change or to adjust something in the game? Or is it always something that comes like from yourself? If you're like satisfied with how it works, then that's the game you want to make? Or is it also sometimes has it happened that people have said like, hey, this doesn't really work because X, Y, and then you overhaul it?
Player feedback is super important. Yeah, I mean in general, but also to the development of Cultic. But I'm also one of those people that's like, don't look at it till I'm done.
Okay.
Very, very often. And so like I usually like when I'm like if I'm posting progress on something that I'm working on, I'm usually not interested in feedback at that time. I'm interested in feedback when it's done, because I don't think that the feedback is entirely useful until the entire idea is out there and you can see it for its whole part. And then after that, yes, absolutely, like community feedback was super important, which is why Cultic had 2 demos and there was a lot of interaction with the community there. And so as long as I'm able to put the whole thing out there after I get it to a point where I'm happy with it, then it's much easier to digest feedback, because if I get that feedback before it's done, then it's like, well, it's not done yet. So like, but it'll be better when it's done. But if it gets to the point where I'm like, okay, no, this is the way I want it to be, then I can kind of step back and look at it through the scope of other people's feedback, without kind of that nagging voice in the back of my head that says, well, it's not done yet. Well, you just got to finish it first, and then it will look better or whatever. if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I also feel sometimes if you have an unfinished work, you're trying to explain the players what you want them to see. Like it's like, don't look at this, but like imagine this would be there, and then this would work like that. And so yeah, I can I can totally relate to that. You have to have like the full experience at least there. It doesn't have to be the full game, but the idea has to be fleshed out enough for them to realize what it is you want to do, and then go from there. Yeah. Yeah, and then maybe something for the future. Do you have anything exciting in the pipelines? I mean, probably CULTIC Chapter 2, right?
Yeah, there is that. So yeah, I'm working on Chapter 2 of CULTIC right now, and so which is nice because it's kind of being in the groove when it comes to audio and music, where I feel like I've kind of got that, because there, even if you just like listen to CULTIC's soundtrack, you notice like there's a lot more of like the sound font, crusty instrument stuff in the earlier parts of the game, and then kind of more so as the soundtrack goes on, it starts to lean more towards that full that full symphonic sound. And so at least so you can kind of tell that the game's audio style kind of evolved as it was developed. But I kind of feel like I'm finally at a place where that's pretty consistent. I'm sure there's probably people that would disagree with me, but to me, it feels like I'm at a spot where it's not constantly changing. And so it's nice to be able to work on that and feel confident that I have a style that's going to work. So that's always the stressful thing about starting a new project is finding that like artistic style that's going to define the game. And I'm one of those people who I don't like developing games with placeholders for art and stylistic things. And so like I don't like to even prototype things unless I'm confident about the look and feel of it. And sometimes it takes forever to get to that point, so that can suck. But then I'm also working on a little side project called Bone Rooms, which is just a goofy little multiplayer thing. I'm trying to learn some net code and get better at like online stuff, because I have little experience in it right now. And that's like a completely different set of audio challenges, because that's more of like a hi-fi, got a bit of like a psychological horror feel to it, and so you get to do a lot more with just like really creepy audio, and I don't have to be limited by the bit crusher this time around, so it's nice to work free of that limitation.
Yeah, that's interesting. So speaking of netcode, so that might mean for CULTIC in the future more multiplayer and maybe even co-op?
Never.
Okay,
Never.
that's
very
a clear no.
I tried it, but CULTIC systems are very complicated. Like there is a lot going on. And the example I used, I think when I wrote up my my Steam post about it, was like I was just looking at like TNT, like the dynamite in CULTIC and how that worked. And it's like not only is it's like a projectile that the player can throw out, but it's also like a physics object, and enemies can also interact with it, and it can also be shot, and enemies can kick it around, and like the ghost enemies can pick it up and throw it back at you. And so it's like that's for one item, that's like 6 different enemies that have to have their code rewritten to work with online, and then you've got to deal with like the physics aspect of it, and like which client is going to have authority over the physics. And that was just like one small thing. Just throwing dynamite in, and all of the changes that the game's code base would have to undergo to make that work online. It would be really cool for sure, but that would be something like where like Chapter 2 sells gangbusters, and I have a crazy amount of money to throw at a team to do it for me, because I don't I just don't think I'm gonna have the motivation to ever, because I would have to destroy the code base and write a huge chunk of it again from scratch. And I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, at some point, I mean, it's too much. And I also guessed like it would be interesting to see what would happen with the slow motion effect, because that's also something that you trigger as a player.
Yeah.
And so how would that work in like multiplayer and co-op? You would have to lose it or do something weird. I don't know. So yeah, I'm not too sad about it, to be honest, because I really like the experience as a solo game. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to Chapter 2. So. Yeah, get on it.
Me too. That's what I tell people. I'm looking forward to it too. I also want to play it. Just let me know when it's done.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that would be good. Okay, so yeah, this one and then your next one will be this multiplayer thing, and yeah, that's like, do you have like just always one project in the pipeline while you're finishing up the last one? Is that the thing you want to do, or is it like you try different things and whatever sticks gets like a full treatment?
Well, this is kind of the first time I've ever been in a position where I have like a project that's actually like finished or close to finished and being sold. CULTIC's the first game I've ever like chapter 1's the first thing I've ever finished and like put out on the market, not counting like little game jam things. And so this is kind of the first time where I have the prospect of looking at like, what do I do next? Because before CULTIC, as a hobbyist game developer, it was kind of just whenever I got a new fun idea, I would drop whatever I was working on and start on that new thing. And so this is kind of the first time where I actually get to like justifiably say, okay, like what is next? Because this project's done. But Bone Rooms right now is just kind of functioning as a tool to avoid burnout with CULTIC, because chapter 1 burned me out hard. And I'm trying very hard to avoid that burnout, which fortunately for me and unfortunately for the fans means that I'm working less hours on it and I'm taking much more time for myself when I need it. Because CULTIC was to the point where I would work on it like 10 hours a day and then some on the weekends because I was just really wanted to get it out and be able to pay the bills and things like that. And now that I have the luxury of a little bit of time, I'm just like I don't want to work those hours again. It was grueling. And so part of that is just reducing my hours to something a little more realistic, taking my weekends back, and then if I wake up and I just like, especially when I'm working on something really tough in CULTIC, there comes to a point where if I'm forcing myself to work on it, I'm going to be doing subpar work that I'm not very proud of. And so at that point, it's better to step away and shift gears to work on something else. And sometimes I can do that within CULTIC. Like if I'm super burned out on level design, I can switch over to like writing music or 3D modeling or something that gets me into a different creative space. But sometimes it's just like, I don't want to look at CULTIC right now. I want to work on something else. And Bone Rooms is a small enough project that I don't run the risk of like getting completely immersed in it and turning it into some other huge thing. I can make big, meaningful changes to that game because it's so small. And, just a couple hours of work, I can add things that completely change the game. And it's harder to do that with CULTIC because large changes have to be super thoroughly tested. And make sure they don't break the entire chapter that's already been released. And so, there's not, chapter 2 doesn't have quite so much innovation going on. It's not, the fun part of game development for me is like I said before, getting to put new ideas on paper and try them out and see how they work. And that fun process of discovery and exploration and experimentation. And when you're just kind of creating new maps for chapter 2, you don't get to do as much of that because I don't want to change the gameplay formula. And so you get to do it in small bits, coming up with new enemies and new set pieces, but you don't really get to mess around with those large, dramatic, like, oh, this would be such a cool new gameplay feature because it could, completely break the balance of the content that's already out. So yeah, it's nice to have that side project to kind of just like dip into when I'm starting to feel the burnout and rather do that than feel like I'm banging my head against a wall and working on something I don't want to work on. And so it's nice to have that as a backup project.
Yeah, that's a very healthy way of working, and it's good on you that you don't do like 10-hour days, because after a while, it's no matter how good you are, it's human nature that you start to burn out because you need that kind of rest period. And also, as you like said, if you're burned out, you don't do your best work. I myself also try to do that in my field because the good thing is I can either design sounds, or I can go out and record sounds, or I can even build something to make a sound. So I'm also trying to switch up, especially when I'm stuck on something. That's the best thing. Like, do something else that's also productive, so you don't feel like, okay, I didn't do anything today. But yeah, even if it's something small, something different, I think that's a good tip for. It doesn't matter which kind of art you do, to switch it up and to not put in 10-hour days consistently.
Right.
Yeah, I think I'm all out of questions. So the only thing left to do is, if you have any shout outs, if you want to promote anything, CULTIC, for example, or anything else, anyone, feel free. The floor is yours.
Oh, I mean, yeah, if you haven't checked out CULTIC, and you're a fan of retro shooters or Resident Evil or horror games in general, check that out on Steam. It's only $10, and it's a pretty good time. Plus, you can go experience all this crunchy audio that we've been talking about so much. And then otherwise, you can follow me and what I'm working on Twitter, at JSawsGames, and that'll probably, I'm sure, be in the description of this show somewhere,
Of course.
in case you want help spelling it. But that's probably all I got.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks again for taking the time and for speaking Foley and audio with me.
Sure, anytime.
Looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? We're part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a hand-picked selection of the very best podcasts about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting on patreon.com/fieldandfoley or ko-fi.com/fieldandfoley, where you gain early access to episodes in lossless format and can submit questions for our guests. Thank you for listening.